All right, I see quite a few cameras back on.
Okay.
So, Erica, part of this is career development. So I'll ask you to, provide a bit of your bio, but I'll just say, we're honored to have Erika Smith here. Previously she served as Deputy Director of the Yale Entrepreneurship Institute, and that's part of how we met. And she played a big role in helping us to get started with innovation to impact from when NIH posted their initial announcement, and I forwarded over to Erika, and suddenly there was a list of email chains, and there was actually more activity than I had anticipated around getting this built up. And we spent some long days together at her kitchen table thinking about, yeah, but we need to not call it entrepreneurship, call it innovation, because then we'll get a more balanced cohort, and giving each other high fives. And so it was just a great experience to dream about this program. And I'm glad to have her continue to be a part of this process that she helped us develop. So she left Yale to become CEO of Renetics, and she's been highly successful at raising funds for that company. And so we're happy to have her to talk with us about that experience and other experiences that faculty could benefit from. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you, and thank you, Patricia. It's great to be back here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is the inaugural Innovation to Impact coffee mug, so I have it here to start us off. I will give you a little bit about my background. Again, as Patricia mentioned, I am CEO of a company called Renetics Bio. It's a New Haven-based biotech company working in the neuroscience area. We are a clinical stage company, so we've gone through all sorts of development paths. The other thing that I'll share kind of before jumping into the presentation is that my background has been spent about the last 15 years in kind of on the investor side. I've done everything from angel investing personally into companies, as well as running 2 investment seed funds, one with Johnson & Johnson money and one with money from Yale that was kind of a quasi-seed fund as well as a grant. So I was on the assessment side of it, looking at a lot of technologies coming in. And then I've worked for a number of venture firms, basically looking at a deal flow. And now I'm on the company side. So I kind of took that and then I jumped off to run as the CEO of my company. And in that role, I've been able to raise about $30 million all in. A good portion of that is grant capital, which is kind of on the order of maybe 10 million, something like that, maybe a little bit more, 10, 15. We have SBIR. We've been able to get foundation capital. We've been able to get angel investment. We've been able to get private equity and venture investment. And so I can truly, for good or bad, speak to sort of the whole continuum of, the good, the ups and the downs of doing this, fundraising and how to best approach it. So that being said, I'll jump right in, but I, hope to be able to cover with you today the items that, were expressed to me of interest, non-dilutive versus dilutive financing, just making sure that everybody really understands the different types of funding that could potentially be accessible, and some things that you might want to think about, some secrets, so to speak, secrets to consider. So the one thing though that I do want to make sure you're aware, and as we go along, and I know this is a little bit interesting via Zoom, is please send chats. I'm going to make sure I hopefully can keep those open, or unmute yourself, because I really would prefer this to be as interactive as possible, even though it's a little difficult sometimes through this virtual world that we're living in right now. So it was nice to actually catch the tail end of Andrew's conversation talking about SBIRs and funding. So you guys are drinking from a fire hose, I would imagine, at this point. And it looked like I kind of skipped over, sorry, I lost it when I moved my thing in advance, but Barbara, I think that the majority of the group is looking at kind of 200 and, yeah, there we go. Can everybody see this from what Yeah, okay. So we're kind of on the order of, some people have grand ambitions on the 20 million, but a lot of us are in the seed stage. And I think that's kind of where most people live for quite a bit of time when they're starting off with new technology. So I'm sure you guys have seen this, but this is that, valley of death concept where, things that get started in academia or early stages have a fair amount of resources, R01s, other resources that one can draw upon from university and other types of support, as you can see kind of on the research resources. But as those move further towards commercialization, a lot of times there aren't the resources within academia to actually commercialize things. You can have patents, you can have a lot of spin outs of the technology, but the reality is you need new funding, new mechanisms for funding. And I think the thing that's kind of funny with this is, the one thing that doesn't happen is, banks are not there for you, and you've got to you have to be able to figure out other more highly risk capital to fund your project in going forward. So we already took the poll, so I'll try. It sounds like we're kind of across the board, but again, sort of in the 250, 1 million kind of range. So that we'll talk about that. And again, as Andrew kind of said at the end of the presentation, I am available to follow up offline. So anything that you see or you'd like to dig into more, please consider me a resource after this session. So I'll jump right in, and kind of the easiest type of funding is to look inside and see what you have. Certainly thinking about seed capital really a lot of times can come from yourself, and it comes down to what do you have in your wallet. These are credit cards, equity lines, maybe even revenue from a product that you have. So, this is something that even though entrepreneurs may end up raising money, there is certainly a validation. If you're willing to invest in yourself, there's a lot that, kind of gives you validation that you really trust what you're doing. So I think there's a little bit of this. It certainly may not get you very far, but they're standing up to, to be able to say, I am going to bet on myself as well. So some of the pros to betting on yourself are, it's relatively easy access. I'm not saying I'm condoning, running up your credit cards, but it is certainly easy to get to. You have your own control. You don't have to ask anybody except maybe husbands or wives or other family members, but in general, you can control what you borrow. And again, you're betting on yourself. The obvious ones are cons. You have debt, you have risk that you're adding to your own personal beyond just the business. So certainly that's something that one wants to be aware of. So the second type of seed financing, if you kind of want to go one step beyond as you think about, progressing, is friends and family. And you may have heard it considered friends, family, and fools. So, this is money that you should have easy access to. These are people that are around you. And I always sort of joke, if your mom doesn't want to invest in you, or your dad, or your grandparents, then that says something. But more likely than not, there can be resources with friends and family, and going to those sources of capital, which tend to be pretty small. I mean, depends on what kind of resources that you have at your disposal, but kind of on the order of less than 50,000, something like that, 100,000, 250 maybe, that you may be able to find that kind of resource in general around where you are. So again, the pros are there's pretty easy access. The cons are pretty obvious as well. I've worked with a number of companies that Thanksgiving can be tough. If there's an expectation, which is kind of around the corner, right? If there's an expectation of payment back, it can really do damage if the return, or there was an expectation that was misaligned from taking money. So it's something to really think about. I had one of my companies in the J&J fund that I managed ended up having a father-in-law who was a pretty big investor in the company and pretty substantial, about $500,000. And it was really, really difficult to fix the structure of that company long term. So it's certainly good money, but you have to be very thoughtful about taking it and make sure you know what the expectations are going forward. So the next stage, kind of like getting further away from who you know, are angel investors or family offices. And I just threw up the definition of what an angel investor is. It's someone who, has $1 million of assets and so on and so forth. So the one thing that I joke about angel investors is, if you go to them and you say, I've got this great idea, it's amazing, it's going to make you lots of money, the first thing that they're going to say is, you're too late, because they tend to have already made their money, and that may be something that's driving them, but it may not be the only thing driving them. So it's something to be aware of, that they come in different shapes and sizes, and you really need to kind of know who you're working with. So it's an interesting group to kind of approach. Again, I've been on the angel investing side personally, putting money, kind of first money into companies. I had a really, I worked with a gentleman who went out and started his own company, and I said, I'll bet on that guy because he's so crazy. I think he'll just make it happen. And it was a 10x exit. So which means for every dollar I put in, I got $10 back. And so, you can certainly, as an angel investor, you can certainly make money, but it's very, very high risk. These are early ideas and companies, and you really just kind of hope and keep your fingers crossed that it works out. The good piece, if you're on the company side going after angels, is that a lot of times you can bring people into your orbit that have different experiences, different backgrounds, different expertise, and they can help you. So they can be kind of additive to your team, not only on the capital, but on the resources. They, can put a pretty substantial amount, depends on what you define as substantial. But, in my mind, I think about an angel round typically is up to about $1.5 million. There's plenty of exceptions. I mean, there's, angels that can put, tens of millions of dollars to work. So I don't want to limit it to that, but that's kind of a typical round is, give or take to about $1.5 million. And because these tend to be, at least the individuals, there may be relatively limited due diligence. It just might be that person may trust your team, trust your opportunity, and just go for it. And I think really importantly, especially with what everybody here is working on, is that there may be a decision to fund way beyond investment return. Things that you have someone who suffered, from a challenge, from, substance abuse or something like that. That may be something that they'd love to make money on it, but they really want to see you be successful because of the activities that you're doing. So, so it's an interesting pool of people and pool of financing to definitely consider. The cons are, as I said, the pros were active involvement. The cons are as well. So once you take money from people, and if maybe you get a crazy one in there, is they may want to be an integral part of your business. And since they put money and they put capital, it's just very structurally can make, be difficult to turn them away. So you want to make sure before you would take any money from an angel that you really understand how much they want to get involved and what the expectations are. The other thing is in regards to angel groups, so where there's angels get together, do due diligence together, invest together to sort of maximize the bulk of money that they can deploy. They can have a more substantial due diligence process and can be more like VCs or venture capitalists, which we'll talk a little bit about. So it may not be as sort of limited due diligence as I described earlier. So one thing that I just want to note is, some secrets for success, so to speak. I was asked in preparing for this is, could you go through a term sheet? Could you, walk us through, best practices for that? And one thing that I just wanted to share is that I certainly could, and we could certainly go through things where you could get tripped up, but I also would really highly suggest that, you get good legal advice. There's only so much you can be expert in anything that you do in life. And making sure that you set your company up very soundly at the beginning with good structure is incredibly important. So, you know, spend a little bit of money to make sure it's done right. Make sure you have good term sheet review. Make sure you don't work yourself into a corner by, you know, not doing that, and make sure you have the right people around you. So from here, I'm going to go check. Patricia or Barb, or can you make sure I'm not seeing any chat, so I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Are we?
We have one question. How far does paying with sweat equity go? That's from Annette.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think that goes back to, you know, starting with yourself. It really speaks volumes as you get downstream, is to saying, I've put sweat equity in, I haven't taken pay for what I'm doing. So, you know, that alone really does, you know, kind of show that you're betting on yourself and you believe in yourself, if that makes sense. So the other thing is, I think you're going to have a lot of people come talk to you about SBIRs and all of that. Like I said, we've had about $10 million of SBIRs, phase 1, phase 2. We worked with a group called Bridges, which is the part of the NCATS program at NIH, which goes from translation, pre-IND, pre-investigation of a new drug, all the way to a new drug application. So we've had a lot of resources there. But we've also worked with foundations. So we're working with a foundation called Wings for Life that wants to cure spinal cord injury. And so we've received about $7 million from that foundation. So there's a lot of resources available, you know, beyond NIH, foundations, and so on and so forth. So I just want to kind of point that out. They all have different requirements, but, you know, kind of look broadly at where you may want to consider capital. The good thing about grants are they are non-dilutive, meaning they don't take equity in your company, they don't require repayment. You know, so it's basically, I'll put it in air quotes, like, you know, free cash coming into your organization to, you know, to deploy to what you told them you're going to achieve. And typically those processes, if you're working with NIH or with a foundation, it's a pretty rigorous review. So that money is quite validating. It means that, you know, real people have taken a look at your technology and have put their money behind it. You know, the cons with grant funding, it has a fairly long review cycle. I mean, easily more than 6 months, can be much longer. You know, I think you've got to, you know, be able to be successful in navigating pretty complex processes and monitoring and structural pieces as well. So the one thing that I would suggest if one is looking at grants or any kind of capital is I always really highly encourage people to look at a parallel path. Do put in those grants, even though they might take a year to start. If you don't start, you're always a year behind. So, you know, think about ones that you can get started, get that process rolling, and then the grants are never meant to be enough capital. I mean, your NIH and SBIR and all the foundations are looking for other types of resources to come alongside them. So I would very much suggest parallel pathing with investments. And if you can do both of those, you can kind of make sure that you have as many opportunities for investment success as possible. So I'm going to jump now to venture capital, and you know, this is kind of what we all, you know, I think Andrew was alluding to as a great, you know, great potential for access. And you know, I would agree. I mean, there's money in the market to be had for kind of early private equity of funding. And so typically, you know, depending on where you are in the stage of investment, they'll designate it with a, you know, Series A, A1, Series B, C, that kind of thing. When you start to see companies that are like Series like H and F, that things didn't go very well typically for them, typically. So, you know, you typically want to have, you know, a few rounds of venture capital, best case, and then, you know, be prepared to potentially go public and or be acquired. So the one thing to take note, you know, the idea behind venture capital is it's risk-based capital. They're trying to de-risk the amount with their money to try to get you to a potential return for their money invested. And so it's very much really aligned with financial returns. So when you're talking to these with venture investors, that's the kind of key thing to think about. Whereas angels and some of the other people may have, you know, secondary goals, and venture capital certainly, you know, will, you know, want to have secondary goals, but the purpose and the primary focus is pure return, pure financial investment. So making sure that you identified what an exit is, or how you're going to get money out of what you're working on to return to them, is incredibly important. So the pros, especially if you're working with, you know, top-notch venture capital, is it's very validating. You know, people are going to be excited about hearing and, you know, knowing where you've gotten your capital and that you've been through a very rigorous evaluation. And they can be very instrumental in making sure you're connected with additional resources and connections. So really, you know, a fantastic source of funding. And I would suggest there are some negatives. The first is it can take a lot of time, just like a lot of this capital can, with significant diligence as well. So, you know, you can go through a long process of, you know, responding and providing information, and it may or may not end up in a positive result for resources. There is dilution. They're absolutely going to be taking equity in your company, and so just being aware of that. It's not, dilution isn't a bad thing. It's just, you know that when you have the dilution, you're hopefully, you know, having a smaller piece of a bigger pie. And so just keeping that in mind, it's you know, it will happen, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just to be aware of. And you know, I think there are potentials for business alignment. I actually, when I was at Yale, had the opportunity. I was kind of like the interaction between a lot of the companies that we were spinning out and a lot of the venture funds that would come to campus to look at their, you know, concepts. And you know, and one of the teams that I met with was Andreessen Horowitz, and that's a, you know, very well known, very well established fund. And they said, well, you know, we don't want anyone that's going to exit early. We want to invest in people that are crazy enough to, you know, make sure that we push to billions and billions of dollars. That's our thesis. That's what we want. So that's a good, you know, that's fine. That's all good. But I think part of it is just making sure there's an awareness of how long you're going to be into the to your company, what your expectations are in getting out, and making sure that aligns with the investors' expectations as well. And sometimes that can kind of be at a different time point, or different amount, basically, kind of going forward. So just to share, I guess, a few secrets for success, so to speak, is, you know, the key in engaging investors, be it angels, be it VCs, I'm going to say really this being very obvious, but is to do it with warm connections. You know, anything that you can, if you can get introduced personally to people or meet people personally, even in this virtual world, it's a game changer, right? No one likes to get these cold emails, you know, out of the blue about, I am so and so. So to the extent you can leverage events, like, you know, accelerator programs like, you know, like Innovation to Impact, LinkedIn, maybe some of your advisors can intro you, alumni networks. I mean, there's any number of ways to get warm connections, but I would suggest going into angel or a venture fund without that, you might as well probably not bother. I think it's just going to get lost in email and actually probably not be perceived very well. Because if you can't figure out a way to work into their network, you're probably not creative enough to figure out a way to solve for your business issue either. So I think that's kind of, you know, a very important point to make in getting connected. And before doing that, and I know you guys are working on some decks and making sure it's, you know, really clear and detailed, is really pressure test your deck with team advisors. Make sure it's as solid as possible, because once you get out of the the realm of people that want to help you, you want to have your best foot forward. So making sure that there is unbelievably solid deck feedback, really make sure you've got that down before sort of engaging, certainly with people that you don't know. The other thing is, and again, this is somewhat obvious, but it's worth mentioning, is making sure that you're at the right stage and actually technology for the investment firm. I mean, some firms are looking at healthcare IT, some are biotech, some are preclinical, some are, commercial stage. So make sure you're matching, not that they're just a venture capital firm, but that you really are kind of in their sweet spot. And go down one level from just what the company does, but go down into the partner level. Try to understand who is at the partner level within that firm that would be interested in your type of a technology. Because everybody in the investment firms are somewhat solo. They're going to be doing their own deal flows. They're going to leverage off of each other. They're going to work together. But that's going to be their specific investment if you were to be successful with them. So really identifying those specific individuals. And then I guess maybe last but not least on this, I've seen people waste a lot of time with firms that say they're investors and they're not. They say they have a firm and they aren't active anymore, or they're at the end of their cycle and they're just waiting to fundraise again. So really understanding, like, when was the last investment that they did? What was the last investment that they did? Are they early in their fund, middle stage fund? Are they at the end of their fund? And they don't want to, they may just need to hold their capital aside to what they've already done. So making sure you understand that. And then last but not least, the law of large numbers. You got to hear no a lot. And maybe you won't. Maybe you'll get super lucky, unlike 99% of the people that go out and raise money. But as you get out there and as you share your story, there's going to be feedback, and being able to take that feedback and be able to improve upon it for the next investment pitch, and even to go back and to say, hey, I heard what you said. I'm going to make sure I fix that if I can, or this is how I'm de-risking it. Really be open to listening and being able to talk to a lot of people, because that's how you advance.
And then I have a question come up in the chat. Any financial strategy thoughts about the many entrepreneurs that sold their product and became an employee of the larger company that bought their product? So this is from Eric.
Oh, sort of like, so in other words, they bought maybe read it one more time, just want to make sure I understand the question.
What thoughts do you have of entrepreneurs that sold their product and then became an employee of a large, so acquisitions basically. So what thoughts do you have about financial strategy when it comes to being an entrepreneur who's part of a company that gets acquired?
Oh, so you're not the founder. You're just someone who is part of a company that's been acquired. So there's, I guess, the two things. If you are the founder, sometimes what happens is it's an acquisition, but really it's just an acquisition for you as a person because you're so amazing. But they acquire your company to make sure that you can get tied in. So that's kind of one piece, one approach that companies can take. And, I think if you are in a company, if I understand it, and you're just an employee with that company, it depends on what kind of, I guess the question is, do you want to work with a larger company if you were acquired? Do you want to have sort of an employment agreement with your prior company before you get in there to, continue to have a role in a position? So I might be missing exactly what you're going for. If you wanted to unmute, I'm happy to.
Yeah, Erika. Sorry. I was thinking of, throughout this couple of days, there have been examples of people that have been very successful creating a product, and then they ended up selling that product and taking over a leadership position in the company where they sold it to. So thinking about a strategy, that's about, what do you think about that, a strategy of one thinking financially to be successful with a product that ultimately could be sold to a larger company and then becoming you know, a part of a leadership team for that larger company. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, what a better way? I mean, assuming that you made enough, you know, like there's a couple things, you know, if you could, that would be a win-win, right? If you have the ability to sort of, well, number one, if you're excited about the company you're going to or who's acquiring you, right? But you may have more resources, more people, more opportunity. I mean, I think that, you know, there's you know, kind of two generic ways to exit, right? One is selling your company and to a larger organization and getting acquired, or, you know, doing an IPO, that kind of thing. So if you're acquired and you, you know, want it to continue to advance your program, I think that would be a win-win for, you know, an exit, that you can continue to build it and advance it within the confines of, or with the resources potentially of a larger organization. So, I mean, I guess that's what I would say. If that would certainly be a good goal, you know, if they would both acquire you and then bring you on to lead it, that'd be great.
So Eric has a question, which is, how does someone find information on firms, such as stages, different investments they've made, and so on?
Well, there's a lot of resources that are out there, some that are more expensive than others. So there's, you know, Crunchbase, you can go there and sort of see what people are doing, you know, kind of you can look at people that have invested in your competitive area and identify firms that might be interested in you. You can just simply go to trade shows or, you know, investor meetings and identify people who are speaking. You know, it's kind of one-off. There's PitchBook. That's another resource. That one's kind of expensive, but, you know, maybe through the various resources or academic ability. I think like, for example, I think Yale did end up getting some seats on the PitchBook, and they have like all of the different firms, you know, what they invested in, how much they invested in, when they invested in, who's the partner, that kind of thing. So there are, you know, public information sets. You just have to kind of chase them down a little bit.
Yeah, so if your university has like a business school, chances are they've subscribed, and you can go to your librarian to see what they have access to.
Yeah, PitchBook is probably the best in my mind. They really do a nice job of being able to search for all sorts of filters that you can put in there if they have access to that. Okay, good. Well, maybe to the question that was asked by Eric, is this corporate partnership. I mean, I think that what's really, you know, so you can get your venture investors and so on and so forth, but the reality is if you can, you know, very early on get together with partners that might be acquirers for your company, there's lots of ways you could potentially engage. So you could simply use their, you know, everything from, you know, maybe they have some technical expertise that, you know, with what you have and that what they have, they can be, you know, combined together. Maybe they have a distribution channel that you can use to sell your product. Maybe they'd be willing to do an investment. Maybe they have an VC investment arm that would be willing to take kind of higher risk because you're early on, but then they're kind of keeping an eye on you to bring you into their organization later. So there's like a lot of different structures when you think about ways you might be able to engage with people that are like further along and, you know, as would be considered corporate partners. You know, the good things about that are, it's, you know, tends to be very validating if it's a good partnership, and certainly there's a lot of expert resources and funds. I'll speak from my company's perspective. Personally, we have a really engaged corporate partner that's worked with us, and I can call up, and if I need support on the regulatory side, or if I need support on, you know, toxicology or this, that, and the other, I mean, I have to ask for it. I'm not part of that organization, but having like the best of the best people to be able to call on and make sure you're going on the right path for what you're working on is incredibly valuable for a small company. So it's very, very, very good if you can kind of find the right one.
Kind of based off what you're saying. So we've kind of heard partnership and being acquired, and kind of how do you kind of make the difference or the choice between the two of them? For example, so our company, we're thinking about making, or we're goal is to make a therapeutic. So obviously, being a small company, we're looking to partner eventually with a pharmaceutical company to kind of mass produce this and kind of use a lot of their established mechanisms. So, you know, what's kind of the benefits of partnering versus acquisition, and when would you kind of want to do one versus the other?
I mean, that's a very important question. You ask something that's critical and key. I think it depends on, number one, there's so many pieces to it. So there's the financial pieces. Do you need them? I mean, so when do you want to engage? Do you want to try to advance it as far as you can before and maximize your value? Would you like to get them in early on? Then, you know, then you might be, you know, maybe acquired or partnered in a less expensive way from, you know, the big company, or you may be so early they're not going to engage with you at all. So, you know, you might need to get to a certain stage before they will even start to engage either in partnership or acquisition. So there's a lot of structural things. It depends on what your corporates are looking at and where you are in development. But I would suggest, you know, starting to know one another, starting to have conversations if you think there's opportunity and it's something that you would explore. You know, I think sometimes these partnerships take quite a bit of time. So, you know, building those relationships as you building up your program can be quite helpful. All right. So some of the cons are, you know, and it really goes to the question that you just asked is, do you really want to do it right away? You know, once you get in bed with the, you know, 800-pound gorilla, you're going to be, you know, you're going to be a little bit guided by, you know, depending on how close that relationship is, that partnership is, you may have less flexibility as to what you can do as your company. So you know, it's a balancing act as to where you want to go. And the other thing that, you know, is worth thinking about is once you do have a partner, I mean, unless it's incredibly well defined and bracketed off and so on and so forth, is it can potentially limit you being able to engage in other corporate relationships, you know, because they know, you know, XYZ company is already with you. Is there an opportunity for someone else to come in? So, you know, that goes down to making sure you got like the right legal people thinking about it, all the variables you would have in putting together a corporate partnership. But just to be aware, it's a good thing. It can be a good thing, but it can also, you know, there's always, you know, it's a double-edged sword and you just need to be aware of it. So I think you guys are talking about this a lot. I'm gonna kind of focus on some of the things that really I've seen from seed investors and also the venture, kind of getting into the venture side of things, that can sidetrack companies early on. And I think they go to some of the questions that have been asked as well. Is the most important thing is to identify where there's an inflection point for your development. So you want to make sure you're funding yourself either through partnerships or through financing or other ways that you are able to de-risk your opportunity. And so depending on what you're working on, it's hard to define it broadly. It could be you have some market acceptance, you have some customer validation, maybe I think the question was, well, I'm working on a therapeutic. So, how, you know, when is the right stage for that? You know, depending on what, you know, it could be preclinical, it could be in vivo data, it might be even in vitro data, you know, but so kind of thinking about like where you are in the continuum and what amounts of money might de-risk what you're working on and get you more positioned for higher value is the key. And a lot of companies, I think this inflection point is probably the hardest thing. It's harder than raising the money in some ways, because you have to somehow map where you're going and how much money you need, and they have to meet the reality of what people are going to be looking for. So, and many times if people get this inflection point wrong, they can say, I funded myself up to a point, and then there's no partner, there's no nothing, and you're kind of stuck. So making sure you understand what that is quite important. All right. Okay. I mentioned this before, but, you know, de-risking and inflection points, there's no one size fits all. You know, biotech is very different than healthcare IT and versus devices. So, it depends on what you're working on as to where you need to be able to go to engage capital, but also partnerships and things going forward. Probably broke a little bit of a broken record, but just make sure what you're working on is actually de-risking. I've had a lot of people say, oh, I've de-risked it. I went into some mouse model, and now I should be perfectly set to go out and get major venture capital and so on and so forth. And it might be that you actually need to get into the clinic, or you need to have an investigational new drug, or you might need to be selling, literally have revenue for your your medical device. So understanding what that is quite important, and making sure that the money to get to those de-risking events is mapped very, very well. So I go back to where we started. I think in general, sort of this seed funding to the Series A is kind of typically defined as the valley of death. If you can kind of get past there, there may be some other resources with, downstream financing and so on and so forth. And, at some point, maybe banks and debt, which, nobody's really expecting, but just to kind of put it in contrast. And I put together this like super busy slide. So, it's a lot to kind of take in, but let me describe sort of what I was thinking about in putting it is here at the top. Well, number one, I wanted to talk about the various funding stages and the inflection points, or the de-risking points. And the continuum of financing is seed, which we talked about, angels, friends and family, ourselves. Then you've got Series A, sort of the venture, and Series B is sort of the venture, and then some exits. And so this valley of death tends to be the seed and Series A. And depending on what you're working on, if you're working on digital health, the areas that you're going to want to de-risk typically, that's just examples, is, if you haven't even built out your product, it's just a conceptual idea, you're gonna have a lot to work on. You're gonna have a lot of risk. You're gonna have product risk. You're gonna have customer risk. You're gonna have a lot of risks. And so getting funding to de-risk that piece of it is, could be somewhat of a challenge. But you can continue to sort of build that out, and that's maybe where the right, seed funding is, to sort of make sure you've got that MVP, and, you kind of got something that you can kind of work on and continue on with. And then as you progress, making sure that you validate the business model. So are you actually able to generate revenue? Are you able to acquire customers? Are people finding value in what you're doing? Even if at a small scale, that's really important. And so you might be saying, well, if I've gotten some validation, I've gotten some revenue, I might be kind of getting ready for a venture capital raise, for example. And then from there, I might be getting ready for a bigger capital raise if not only I validated my product and my model, but now I need money to scale. I need money for marketing. I need money for product. I need money for customer acquisition. And then, the exit or the opportunity might be for sustainable growth. So, that's kind of, in general, a generic way to think about digital health. On the biotech side, it's very, very heavy science. Not that digital health can't be that way as well, but it's, a lot coming out of labs, a lot of, kind of more sciencey stuff from, I guess chemistry, so to speak, or biotechnology. And, and where you start with that is, if you're at the preclinical stage or you're in vitro data, it's really hard to raise money. Those are very early stage opportunities. Once you start to generate a little bit more there and you get into in vivo data, early testing, maybe you can start to raise some seed capital. And then certainly as you get into, clinical studies, that changes the trajectory of the company. It's de-risked it. And so there's, potentially venture funds, other partners that could potentially get engaged for phase 1 studies, phase 2 studies, and so on and so forth. And then by the time you're getting into phase 3, typically you're at a stage that a company is going to get acquired, or you're going to go public and you're going to, kind of do it on your own and launch a product. So this is kind of like a snapshot just to sort of put, 2 and 2 together from the inflection points as well as the capital raises. So I will pause. I think I don't know if I overtook time. I'm probably just right on the border. If there's any questions, and Patricia, I'll let you guide me if we're done.
I think you have a few extra minutes. Let me see. Lindy is usually keeping me on top of time. Yeah, so I think he gave you an extra 5 minutes.
All right, okay. So Trina, do you want to read your question out loud?
Sure. I was just wondering if all of these factors relating to funding is like 100% transferable, like to service, like a service type of innovation. Like obviously you can think of it the same way, like it's a product as well that you're providing the service, but I'm just wondering if inherently, because it's not something that, you know, people can have in their hand and just like buy, that if like funders would think of it as more risky, or like how that is incorporated.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I mean, I will be frank. You know, you know what you know and what you don't know. I'm not as familiar with the service models and fundraising. Like I said, it's I think so, in some ways I do know this. If you're potentially growing up service models in regards to that are very people dependent, it can easily morph to a consultancy which is like a different kind of path to fundraising. So it definitely is transferable, but I would highly encourage you to speak to people that have a similar model or identify a similar model, and make sure you understand the measures that one would be looking at in scaling up from a service. I don't think they're 100% transferable at all, and there will be different filters that investors will look at for that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Can you comment on valuation? Yeah, I mean, so I will comment on valuation. I mean, valuation is once you get out of grants and family offices, and really probably even away from angel funds, you do run into very hard conversations with people about what your company's worth, right? And if someone's going to give you $100,000 for your company and say your company's only worth $100,000, they're going to own 100% of you, right? And you may say, no, my company's worth, 10 million, and you're only going to own a small part of me, a very, very small part. So getting that valuation piece right is very important. It comes down to it comes down to the sort of the concept of what people are willing to pay. If you can have a couple of people interested in your technology, you can certainly increase your value, because you can potentially work to play one off the other, and you can increase that consideration. But the reality is, if you have one partner that's working on working with you, then you have to go to other comps. You have to be familiar with other things that are in the market, and you want to be in the ballpark. You don't want to sell yourself low, but you want to go too high either, because I've had people that have tried to get angel investment and venture investment, and they've been so disconnected from reality, like so crazy disconnected from reality, that they can't raise money, period. And so there's not a one size fits all, but making sure that you are aware of reality and pressure testing that is quite important.
All right. So thank you so much, Erika. This was great. I'm sure everyone found it informative. Yeah, it was wonderful. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Feel free to reach out if there's any follow-up questions, and thank you for letting me be part of today.